Hey everybody, Roy Rogers here from the White Book and Second Sons, back with another How and the Why video. I know it's been a while. It's been a busy summer for me. I got married. I took a new promotion at work. So very busy, not enough time to really make these videos alongside all the other Throne stuff I do. But I'm happy to be back in it, and I'm going to have a couple of videos lined up for us in the next couple of weeks. And the first one is about how this is possibly Bara's final moment to shine. Bara, of course, we did one of the last videos I did talked about Bara, and the Bara box ended up having a huge impact on Baratheon as a faction. Probably the largest impact of any box on a single faction, because Bara was just so garbage tier before its box came out, or close to garbage tier, that it just pushed them so far up into the power level. Despite that, though, people were still pretty skeptical of Bara, but the sort of very unique and really interesting meta that we're in right now seems to have created a space for Baratheon to succeed. Because if we saw at the beginning of the month, at GenCon, 2 Bara decks were in the top 16. The Wausau deck, which was Bara Prince that was promised, and a Bara Wars deck piloted by Bretton Reis, did really well at Gen Con, sitting there in the top 16. Great result. And then, of course, Hanno, one of the best players in the world, one of the best deck builders in the world, just won German Nationals with Baratheon and published his list, which is a very different take than either what Wausau did at Gen Con or what Bretton did at Gen Con. And we're going to be talking about 2 of those 3 decks today. We'll be talking about Hanno's list, and we're going to be talking about Bretton's list and sort of why I think that they're really well positioned in the meta. Because, of course, this Gen Con this year was stacked. If you look at the top 16, these are truly some of the best players in North America. Won by Tom Malucci, the king of the LCG world, with my, of course, mentor, Dan Struhall, finishing second, which was a huge, great moment. And then, of course, German Nationals was also stacked. You had 2 former world champions, the form of Reinhardt, who was also last year's Euros champion, and Leonard. You had, of course, Hanno, an amazing player, one of the best deck builders in the world, winning, and of course, my man David finishing up there in the top 4 as well. Just a really strong tournament and these decks had to battle through a lot of what the current meta is. And so I do think, and as Hanno says in his write-up about his winning deck, that this is Bara's moment. It's because of some just sort of ways in which the meta has sort of flowed into where we are right now compared to even where it was a month ago or before Gen Con even. Sort of how the new cards, both the combination of the box and the last 2 packs have shook out, has placed, because of what is really good, because of what the tier 1 strategies are, which we'll get to, and put Bara in a really good spot. So how today's video is going to be organized, we're going to first start to talk about where I think the meta is right now and why Bara is probably a really successful level 2 strategy. And we'll go over, in the second part of the video, 2 Bara decks that are published on ThronesDB, Hanno's winning list from German Nationals, and Bretton's top 16 list at Gen Con, which would provide related but not the same answers to the current meta. So if you are sleeving up for US Nationals, Euros, which is this weekend, or Lord of the Crossing 2 here on the East Coast, Bara might be a nice, good choice based on what you want to see. So let's dig right into it. Okay, so first things first, where is the meta? Well, the meta is really interesting. So what are the tier 1 strategies? Just to recap real quick, if you can listen to my video about this, so I generally, and this is something borrowed from Magic and other card games, it's not a Roy Rogers unique special thing. I wish it was. It'd be sweet. But anyway, I generally like to think about the meta and breaking it down into sort of 3 strategies. There's sort of a tier 1 strategy. These are the best decks. You can go into Annals of Castle Black and look at the meta and just sort of see what's winning. Straight up, what are the best decks? Of course, like all things in card games, this is, slightly subjective, but it's generally pretty easy to prove in numerical. What's winning? And we'll get to, all right. So level 2 is what beats what's winning. No deck currently in the history of Thrones has a 100% win rate, or even a 75% win rate. It floats in the successful decks float in between the 55 and 65 range, in the broader meta. So what is beating the best decks? All right, that's the level 2 strategy. And then level 3 is what beats the level 2 strategy, but tends to lose to the level 1 strategy. This is sort of the super next leveling. So, tier 1, baseline, best pile of cards you can bring. Level 2, you're next leveling these people. All right, these aren't the best pile of cards, but they definitely beat up on that great pile of cards you got over there. And then level 3 is kind of just like, all right, well, I definitely lose to the best pile of cards, but I kick the shit out of that response to the best pile of cards. So those are generally the 3 deck levels. And, there's obviously wiggle room. And you can watch my video that I go into more detail about this. But let's think about this. What is the level 1 strategy? Well, the level 1 strategy is sort of 2 things right now. The 2 most powerful things you can be doing is some variant of Greyjoy. Generally Greyjoy Prince, which won North American Championship GenCon. Also won Field of Fire here in the Northeast Championship Tour. And there's different ways you can build it. You can build it super rushy like Tom did, where it's fast. Prince Balon is usually that deck's referred to. And then, of course, the other way to build it is more of a value grindier matchup, which is sort of popularized by the Storm Bros, whatever, which James Rustano won Fields of Fire with, which might pick, Asha as its sort of Prince Asha, sort of to grind people out. Your game plan isn't necessarily that fast, but it's just saying, I am going to outvalue you, and I'm just going to drown you in cards, card advantage, removal, answer to your locations. Both of those are very valid. They are, even though, and they share a lot of the same cards. A lot of them also, even though he's not a prince, is built around abusing Euron. The newest Euron, the box Euron, the one that searches up silence, puts in the play, and then you can stand him repeatedly with that Intimidate. And those Greyjoy decks are generally in a mid-range race with each other, trying to sort of out, big guy. In Thrones, when these mid-range races, and we've had it before, actually relatively recently, the meta actually right now, before it was Stark and Greyjoy, and now it's just within Greyjoy itself, are just they're in this arms race where, well, you have this big guy, well, I'm going to play another big guy who can control the board and stand him a bunch of times, I'm going, you've got all these big guys. Well, I've got big guys plus removal. So I'm going to, all right, you hit me hard, but I'm now going to remove your big guys. That kind of arms race of just trying to create these sort of just big board states that are pounding on each other, or drown their opponent in cards and action advantage. So the advantage that the Prince decks have, and why they're so good at this, is the agenda gives them card advantage, and action advantage, because with that, the first trigger on Prince lets you search up your Prince. Yay! I've got my Asha, I've got my Balon. Or you can stand your Prince and draw a card. So you get both action advantage. You have one Wyman trigger built into your agenda. Cool. It's a really cool, well-designed agenda. It's definitely not overpowered. And this just creates just a mid-range race, one Greyjoy, because Greyjoy also has probably the best answer in the game in form of Vince, but it also has a really good answer in the form of Night Flare, excuse me. So and of course Newly Made Lord and We Do Not Sow. So it kind of has a very good just across the board answer suite. Now, that's Greyjoy. That's sort of pillar number 1 of the meta. There is actually a second pillar. Because, it might not feel this way sometimes if you queue on Iron Throne to like 7 Greyjoy Prince decks. But there's actually the Shadows agenda, the new one, Kingdom of Shadows, that allows you to play all the non-loyal Shadows cards and characters, excuse me, not cards. All the non-loyal Shadows characters, and then bring the first character you bring out of Shadows is reduced by 2 each round. Very powerful agenda, but the Shadows effects are really powerful, and they're very powerful control. Like, what's so interesting about this meta is it may not feel this way, but actually control is very powerful right now. Anyone who's played against a Shadows deck that's able to do its bullshit knows 100% that this is true. Effects like Gregor, which just makes you putting a 5-cost character in for any reason into play, not into play, excuse me, into a challenge, it's just dangerous. The Mandon Moore's ability to remove characters or cards. The Neil Girl out of Baratheon, the ability, which has great synergy with Sir Robert Strong, just minion said, okay, they marshal their big dude, you kneel it, okay, I get to do my turn. Queen of Thorns as the loyal Shadows card, just creating so much action advantage. Same with Unexpected Guile, just recycling these triggers. Same with the Martell card, Dornish. I think it's Dornish Spy. No, it's not Dornish Spy. It's Starfall Spy, right? One of those two. It's Spy something that allows you to recycle these cards. City Watch, which lets you recycle. There's a broken interaction in Baratheon that you can play their event, put a card into Shadows. Your opponent brings that card out of Shadows. You then City Watch them, and it goes back to Shadows. It can never leave. It's just like a bunch of busted stuff you can do with that. And then, of course, Lannister has Big Cersei. That is really powerful. Or I guess she's not Big Cersei. She's Middle Cersei? Whatever. Shadow Cersei, who is very strong. She can just really just chew up opponent's hand up. Martell has Arion, who can just strip a bunch of icons. And, of course, the Shadows locations are all really good out of the 3 factions of Lannister, Martell, and Tyrell. So, actually, Control is in a good spot. It has the tools it needs. Again, if you've been on Iron Throne and queued against somebody or playing Lannister or Tyrell Shadows in particular, these are really strong decks. They are slow. They lack a win condition in the ways in which many control decks in second edition do, but this one in particular, these decks are ridiculously slow. But they are extremely powerful. Anyone who's played against them knows that if they can do their Shadows bullshit, you're going to have a miserable time. And they have a solid enough Greyjoy matchup because of that. So what we have too is 2 pillars. We have Greyjoy Prince, whether it's its value version with Asha or its rush version with Balon, or we have Shadows, whether it's Tyrell or Lannister. Martell, I think, is like an outside one. Lannister or Tyrell Shadows. These are 2 pillars. These are utterly shaping the meta. So, what could be a level 2 strategy? Well, a level 2 strategy has to be... Well, before we get that, what do these 2 decks demand of decks that are trying to answer them? So, if you don't want to make your ass as miserable as possible by playing Greyjoy Mirrors, which is just miserable, a miserable experience for me, and for many of my teammates as well, I hate Greyjoy Mirrors. It's, who's the nicest top 20 cards of your deck? Whoever's done that, it's good. And then, same with Shadows Mirrors are also somewhat miserable because, it's just like, who sees that little Targ guy that kills Shadows cards? It's gross. Anyway, Mirrors are gross. So, if you don't want to play the Mirrors, what are your options? You want to beat those. Okay, so what kind of interaction does Greyjoy demand? Well, Greyjoy demands some kind of interaction that it has difficulty dealing with. And the problem is, of course, Greyjoy has the strongest answer card, which is Vince. So what kind of answers get around Vince? Attachments are a very powerful way to answer Greyjoy. Because Greyjoy needs to be ready for Shadows decks, they're generally focusing on location removal. And its plots are really, Greyjoy's plot lineup is actually really inflexible. Because, there's a lot of cards they have to run. They have to run at least 2 econ plots. Yeah, certainly is running Valar Morghulis. And then it needs to run some answer plots to Shadows. So that means it's running Barring or King plot or and of course, it's going to be play the We Take Westeros card. So there's not a lot of flexibility in Greyjoy for answering attachments. And a confiscation can be very dead against a lot of decks. So right now, in the Greyjoy Mirror, confiscation is dead. In the Shadows games, confiscation is largely dead. Maybe you can't hit an Unexpected Guile All right, like you just can't. So maybe you can hit the Lannister attachment that gives additional strength. Anyway, it's a dead card. Okay, so Greyjoy doesn't want to interact with attachments right now, except for We Do Not Sow, but that requires an unopposed challenge, which, of course, a deck, which we'll get to, can stop that. All right, so attachments is one of the ways in which you can interact with Greyjoy, and it's not very easy for them. What about shadows? What is a way that you can interact with shadows decks that really can overwhelm them? That's having a really consistent, strong win condition. That generally means rush is pretty good against shadows, particularly rush that can go wide or has redundancy in its effects. So this is why Stark, in many ways, is pushed into kind of out of the meta, because it can't really interact with shadows or Greyjoy in a way that is really good right now. Mira is just not a very good card right now, which it seems super weird, but is actually true. In many ways, Mira, she's good. Obviously, she can blank Balon, she can blank Asha. That's great. But, of course, they have Vince. And they also have a location control for your Skagos. Shadows has an ability to kill Mira. A lot of their effects are come into play effects, excuse me. So Mira's kind of useless against Shadows. And then, of course, Stark doesn't have a huge amount of redundancy in its powerful effects. It has Wyman, Rob. If it's playing Rush, it has Fast Eddie. It has Mira. If you can get rid of those threats as a Shadows player, you win. And it's not hard, necessarily, if you can keep the pressure on a Stark player to do that. So Stark is pushed out of the meta that way. But, as we'll get to in a second, a faction that can find a way to go wide-ish and have redundancy. It doesn't require Rob. It doesn't require Wyman. It doesn't require Fast Eddie in the way Stark does to win. Then you're in a good spot against Shadows because you have redundancy, and Shadows is so slow, because neither of the three factions, like Tyrell's passive power package, except for Old Town, is dead, and you definitely aren't running like Mace, even though there's some cool come into play things with Shadows, but like an 8 gold Mace that's hard to protect. No, you're definitely not doing that. So, and Lannister just barely, I guess they have that one Septon card, but notoriously, Lannister does not have access to passive power. Its renown is garbage. And again, Tyrell's renown is good, but you don't run it in the Shadows deck. Very little, except for Knight of Flowers, the new one, the Shadows one, none of their Shadows cards have renown. So, Knight of Flowers, who's, very vulnerable, is your only win condition to speed up your game. So if you can, rush them down with a crossing strategy, or as we'll get to with Hanno's strategy, and of course, you need to stop them from bringing cards out of Shadows. That's the other thing about Shadows. So that means barring King Plot. Well, King Plot doesn't stop things coming out of Shadows, but it generally stops them being able to trigger things. So that's what they do. So what faction can play these sort of multitude of answers? So again, the multitude of answers. Attachments, plots that prevent cards from coming out of Shadows or coming into play, or plots that prevent your opponent from triggering things. What faction is capable of playing all three of those forms of interaction? That's Baratheon. Baratheon is really the only one that can do that without giving up serious amounts of edge in other matchups. So what that means that either playing Hanno's deck or playing Bretton's deck is a really safe bet in this current meta. So let's just jump in. This will become, I think, a lot clearer when we get to the deck. So let's take a look. First things first, we are starting with Hanno's deck. How to beat Greyjoy Prince. He went 8-1, German Grand Champ. Okay, so where do we want to start? All right, so what's cool about this deck is that it's a R'hllor deck. R'hllor decks have been threatening to be good for a while. It's clearly a theme that Dany has been pushing for a good while, going all the way back to the second cycle. But and it's definitely present in the Bara box. But this is definitely made to abuse those reactions. So what are the key cards? So the key cards for the R'hllor package are, of course, your engine, Selyse. All right, she's new, she's non-loyal, 4 cost, 3 strength, intrigue, power, House Florent, Lady R'hllor. Reduce the cost of each R'hllor attachment you marshal by 3. Okay, so this card is such an engine in this R'hllor deck because it's particularly in this R'hllor deck because of its interaction with trading with the cohort. Trading with cohort, excuse me, not the cohort. Florian's card is really strong, incredibly fun, but it's one of the problems that cohort has is sometimes you run in a situation where you don't set up an attachment or you draw these clunky attachments that it's such a tempo loss to play them to get the chain going, right? Like, so anyone who's played a cohort deck knows that cohort is all about the loops, all right, which is doing trading one attachment for another to gain a massive tempo or action advantage. But the problem is sometimes you can't start your loops because either you draw this clunky ass 3 cost or even 2 cost attachment that you can't afford to make your board go wide enough to get the attack trigger off to win, to switch it into something more powerful. Selyse solves this problem by making all the R'hllor attachments in the game free. And this deck runs a ton of them. It runs, of course, Red God's Blessing, which gives a character the R'hllor trait and gets +1 strength. It runs Lightbringer, the clunkiest of clunky attachments since the core set, which is R'hllor. It runs Light of the Lord, which lets you stand characters to win dominance and gain gold. And, of course, it runs the big one, the busted one, Azor Ahai Reborn. All right, this is a brand new card. It's 3 cost attachment, Legacy, R'hllor, unique character you control only, Terminal, which is great for anyone playing against this. Attached character is considered to be participating in each challenge in which you control an attacking R'hllor character. Okay, so the synergies here are obvious. So Selyse makes them all free. Red God's Blessing makes sure that you always have a R'hllor character to turn on your Azor Ahai. Light of the Lord gives you a little bit of extra stand. And of course, Lightbringer gives you additional stand and gives Stannis Renown. All right? So these are just a powerful set. And they're all free, thanks to Selyse. All free. Powerful. All right, so Selyse is your engine. But to make sure you have redundancy, because what happens if you don't see a Red God's Blessing early? Well, you need other R'hllor characters to make this consistent. So you're running good R'hllor characters like Sir Alistair Florent, who lets you draw a card when he or any other House Florent enters play, and you have 1, 2, 3, 4 Florents, which is pretty good. So you're going to draw. He can usually net you about 2 cards. So he's a good one. Of course, you've got Cor Melisandre for that kneel. You've got the new Stannis Baratheon, who is immune to your opponent's events, draws you cards when you win power challenges, and has the R'hllor trait. You have... What else? And then, Red Priest, of course, the most busted R'hllor card right now. Red Priest, of course, something like... a Kite Sail Freebooter effect if you play Magic. After the Red Police enters play, look at the opponent's hand, then choose 1 card in the hand and remove from the game until Red Police leaves play. This gives you a lot of answers. Again, super strong card against Stark, super strong card against Greyjoy. It creates a lot of situations for decks that want to go first but require specific card synergies. Want to go second, but requires specific card synergies like Drown God, control decks. You going first on the first turn and taking their card could be a huge tempo swing. Then, of course, because you want redundancy, it's running some mediocre R'hllor cards. Okay, but mediocre's fine. R'hllor Infiltrator. This is a new one. Dominance action. Kneel R'hllor Infiltrator to choose an opponent. Give control of R'hllor Infiltrator to that opponent. And to that player and gain 1 power for your faction. We'll come back to the power of this card. It's a mediocre card, but in this specific deck, because of the synergies, it can be very powerful. And of course, the worst one, Acolyte of the Flame. Now, 2 for 2, Bicon, action after the draw phase begins, Neo Acolyte of the Flame to look at top 2 cards of opponent's deck. You may put those cards at the bottom of that player's deck. All right, so that card's kind of garbagey, but it's good in this because you need... Oh, and it's got Engai. Sorry. It's got Engai. So, there's some really powerful R'hllor cards, some really mediocre, and some bad R'hllor cards, but you just need redundancy because there could be times when you're not able to get a Red God's Blessing until you flip into it with Cohort. So that is the R'hllor package. Oh, and you've got Beric. I missed Beric. Back again, Beric. So that's the package. But of course, the R'hllor cards in and of themselves are not particularly good. Like, that synergy is fine. Like, so what the R'hllor package does here is it creates a redundant shell for a Bara Cohort deck. Because of Salice's Salice's raw power in such a deck, you have this powerful shell. But the question is, what do you fill that shell with? You need some payoff, because the R'hllor cards in and of themselves don't really provide you with a payoff. So this is where you need to be running the fatties. So we have 2 big fatties that are in this deck. So we have the new Stannis I mentioned earlier. He draws you cards, and he's immune to opponent's events, which is really good. He can't be poison coined. He can't be tears. He can't be putted if for some reason you run into a Sea of Blood deck. He really sticks on the board in a way that is really useful, actually. He's immune to nightmares. Just powerful. Even though he doesn't have native renown, you need to have, Lightbringer to really sort of like make him into like an engine of victory. He is a very safe place to stack power, though. If you can save him, he's a very safe place to put power. And then the other one, of course, is his older brother, Robbie. This is Korobob. It's simply about intimidating people and renown. So what we do is Azor Ahai Reborn, which means, so you get on one of these 2 fatties, preferably Robert, but you could also do Stannis. And you just go full ham. The fact that I think, let's see, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 characters in the deck, I believe, maybe 6, that don't have the R'hllor trait. So again, you're always going to have. So you can just do a 2-strength intrigue challenge. Suddenly Bob is participating. And this is just busted. And this gives the deck its speed. So the fact that this could be online relatively early as turn 1. All you need to do is set up Salice, maybe a couple other R'hllor guys, and play one of your fatties. You can go full ham. And it just basically guarantees that you're always going to be able to get your Cohort trigger if you have Azor Ahai Reborn and one of the fatties. Because again, Stannis, 7 strength. All right, ridiculous. So that's just really powerful. And of course, you've also got a couple of just standard good Baratheon cards like Maester Crescent and what's his name? Where is he? He's here somewhere. Davos. There he is, Davos. These are cards that have existed and been good since the core set. Anyone who's played with them knows they're good. Okay. So that's how the deck works. It's also supplementing itself with some Warhammer, which just, can give Stannis Intimidate, and any character with Red God's Blessing. It also gives you the ability to draw the Warhammer, switch into Red God's Blessing, things like that, of course. And then, so what are its answer cards? Okay, it has 1 answer card in the draw deck, really, which is, of course, Hunting Accident. Hunting Accident is extremely powerful right now. And the ability to flip into it is also really powerful. Or flip out of it. So what this lets you do is Hunting Accident their Rob, their best character, their Fast Eddie, their Prince Balon, their Prince Asha, their Dany. Go full ham. Get some power. They're locked out. And then once they're locked out for a turn, you go into your closing turn. And then after the first challenge, you can pop Hunting Accident off for any of the 3-cost attachments or a lower attachment. Like, you could flip out of it, out of the Hunting Accident into a Lightbringer on your Stannis and go whole ham. And of course, because of the way it works, flipping out of Azor Ahai Reborn into a Lightbringer, or any of the 2-cost vendors in the Lightbringer, you get the Renown if it's on Stannis. Powerful, powerful, powerful. All right, so Honey Accident in the draw deck it's one of its main answers. I'm really surprised to see Hanno's only running 2. It can definitely be clunky, but it definitely can really just own people. Actually, excuse me, I apologize. The Azor Ahai Reborn interaction doesn't work because I'm just used to ambushing it, and it's actually pretty cost 2. So you can flip from Azor Ahai Reborn into Hunting Accident, not the other way around. I apologize. Still really powerful, though, because you can turn Warhammer, Red God's Blessing, Lightbringer, Light of the Lord into that. Of course, it's also running Milks. What would be a cohort deck without Milks? Excuse me. So it's running Milks. Again, Milk is really powerful against Greyjoy. It's both the Drowned God and the fast variants. Very strong. Okay, so what are its answer plots? Okay, so it's currently, well, let's think about what is the plots that it's running to further its strategy. It has 3 that it's running to further its strategy. The first is At the Gates, the safest card in the world for Econ opener. Boom, think you're going to be playing a long game, maybe against like Shadows or something like that, or an aggro mirror that's going to be all about you making sure that you have a Great Hall or a King's Gate or just some kind of economy. Or you're in the middle of the game and it becomes clear that you're going to be grinding and you need to make sure you have that economy. At the Gates is there to fix your economy. Close Call, which gives you a draw plot, plus the redundancy. Something bad happens to your Robert, something bad happens to your Stannis. You have a bad Valor for you. You don't have a dead draw, and your 2 win conditions, Stannis or Robert, are back in the play. And then, of course, its opener, as Hanno describes in his thing, Vanquish the Unbelievers. 5/8/2 forced reaction. After challenge phase begins, choose a trait. Kill each character you control that does not have that trait, cannot be saved. So this is a good opener, providing an aggro situation for your opponent. 5 gold is solid. 8 initiative basically means you can make sure you go first. You can slap Red God's Blessing on the few cards that you have that are not Relore traded and just own them. Like you could just blow people out. And you can start getting your loops of, Warhammers into Hunting Accidents, into Lightbringers, into Milks, all these kind of things to just really start owning your opponent. Oh, and of course, you win or you die, which the deck doesn't run any draw, so it needs to draw some cards, and it provides you with 2 claim. So, excuse me, there's actually 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 plots that provide it with further its own game plan. And then it has 3 that answer its opponent's game plan. And that is, of course, Barring, which is seeing a ton of play right now as an answer to Shadows. Because it simply says that Shadows deck cannot operate for a turn. If you're playing a Shadows deck, this is an extremely obnoxious card. That doesn't even do it justice, how backbreaking this card could be well-timed against a Shadows deck. And the ability of this deck to seize the board with a 2-claim punch you plot and then go into Barring, and then the Shadows deck can't do anything, is really strong. Or to go 2 claims and then Barring to close the game out. Just makes it so that... How do I put this? It makes it so that Shadows decks just can't interact with you. It just shuts down their synergies. Relatedly, it also has added benefits against Drowned God, but that's not as strong. It's just simply how much it owns Shadows. Then there's King in the North. This is particularly strong, of course. 2 of your strongest characters are kings, Stannis or Bob. A lot of your stuff, like the agenda, a lot of the attachments, they're keywords or they're an agenda. So they don't, they get around King of the North. So even if you don't have Bobby or Stannis out, you can still do things. That's one of the cool things about Cohor playing King in the North is you can still do things even if you don't have one of your kings out. This prevents Shadows decks from doing anything. It generally prevents Greyjoy decks from doing anything because Greyjoy is oversaturated right now with high-cost characters like it always is. And the Balon of the moment is the 6-cost Balon. Prince Balon is running 3 of the 6-cost core Balon. It's not running the 7-coster that was very popular and floating around earlier in the year. And then, of course, Prince Asha's may not be running any Balons because it wants to run additional cards, or if it is, it's also running the 6-cost Balon. Maybe with King of the North coming in, you're going to start seeing a little bit more in the more value-based Greyjoy Prince lists. You'll be seeing King Balon, but still, they have to see him, and there's not a lot that a Greyjoy deck can do besides its saves under the King of the North. There's not a lot that Stark can do. Because they're certainly not running 7-cost Rob. Out from under this. Shadows, it turns off Shadows deck's triggers, but doesn't turn off Shadows' ability to bring cards out of Shadows. So actually for Shadows decks, King in the North, while nobody's like, oh man, I want to be a Shadows deck playing against King in the North, it still gives you more action compared to Barring the Gates. You can still bring cards out of Shadows, oppose things, even win challenges sometimes. It's going to be, of course, hard to win challenges against this deck, but it's still very powerful. So Barring the Gates is good against Shadows, to a lesser extent against Drowned God. King of the North is good against Greyjoy, Stark, and Shadows decks. And then, of course, Political Disaster just owns Greyjoy. Greyjoy decks are all about locations currently. Not about locations in the sense that the location interactions are necessarily great. I mean, they're running things like Maiden's Bane, Night Flare, whatever the one is that prevents defense. I don't even know what it's called. Anyway, Bullshit Boat number 7. All the bullshit boats are just being played now. And there's a card, Silence, that specifically encourages them to go wide with locations. And that means that Greyjoy is all about locations. And to a lesser extent, so are Shadows decks, which both the Lannister and the Tyrell variants are certainly using trade routes as their restricted list. A lot of other Bara decks are using trade routes as their restricted list. There's Stark has plenty of powerful locations in the form of Skagos, and they need a strong economy base. So, and of course, builders and Night's Watch strategies as well. So basically every faction at this point, since the printing of trade routes, locations-based strategies for every faction, except for Lannister, but now Lannister runs Shadows, and Shadows loves locations. So basically every faction just loves playing a bunch of locations. Political Disaster punishes them. But it's particularly good against Greyjoy. Meaning the ability to just wipe out all their bullshit boats and make their silence worse. Like they can't trigger silence, they can't stay in Euron. Boom. Vic doesn't get a million triggers and gain renown and stand, and I don't know what else he does. He does a bunch of stuff. I hate that card. Anyway, this deck is extremely well positioned right now in the meta. It can easily beat Greyjoy Prince. I believe that Hanno was undefeated against Greyjoy Prince. It has solid answers against other Greyjoy strategies like Greyjoy Rush. Greyjoy Rush can't really answer Hunting Accident. Drowned God's going to have issues with Milk of the Poppy, have issues with Barring the Gates. It's ridiculously good against Stark, with its ability to sort of not really care about Mira. I mean, the main Mira target is Robert, but still the ability of Robert to participate in every challenge, giving you at least +5 strength. Stannis, if he's got Lightbringer on, still gets renown through Mira, and big triggers for you like R'hllor, like Red Priest. Stark's forms of interaction for you are really just not very good. So powerful. And there's one thing I was going to talk a little bit about the role that R'hllor Infiltrator plays. So R'hllor Infiltrator plays the role of being a chud, being just one strength way to get your Azor Ahai Reborn chain started, but also could just give you power to close. If you have 2 R'hllor Infiltrators and you go into the dominance phase at 13 power, you just win on the spot. You don't even have to win dominance. Your opponent can stop you from winning dominance. There's just nothing they can do. I mean, I guess if they're going first, they can blank one of them with Mira. If you have 3 of them out, you're at 12 power. It just reduces the amount of power you need to win the game by 1 while it's in play. Ridiculously powerful card. And they're just perfectly acceptable chuds. Medium, because you need to be going fast for the deck to really like in the grand scheme of things, Roller Infiltrator is a very medium card. It's not very good in like a control Barashell. But in this kind of rushy deck, it's definitely really strong because anything you can do to reduce the amount of power you need to win the game is powerful in these kind of decks. So this is Hanno's winning list. Extremely powerful. It is more on the rush side of things. And then let's go to sort of more of the mid-range kind of things, which brings us to Bretton's top 16 deck from GenCon. Okay, so this is more of a Bara control shell. It's running, of course, the way you can tell it's more of a control shell is it's running the control Robert, the new Robert, three choice Robert, you could call him, who either characters with printed cost 5 or higher cannot stand, characters with printed cost 4 or lower cannot stand, or locations cannot stand. Very, very strong card. It's also running the Kneel Everybody Salice. Those are kind of hallmarks of a more control, mid-range style Bara deck. I would probably say that this straddles the line between a control and a mid-range deck because it is running the big boys and girls in the form of Salice, but it's definitely slow. No one is going to accuse this deck of being super fast compared to Hanno's deck, but it does provide consistent answers to a variety of decks. Okay, so let's take a look at how this deck operates. So unlike Hanno, it's up to 3 hunting accidents. Boom. You want that. That gives it some things. Like Hanno's deck, though, it has Red Priests. It's running Roller Infiltrators, which I kind of don't super like in this deck, to play a similar role where it gives you some closing power. It's running Devon Seaworth to fetch out some key locations. It's running Dale Seaworth to recycle things like Spears of the Merlin King, King's Gates. If things get hit by Greyjoy, to get it back before it can get stolen. All kinds of stuff. Very strong. It's running, and then it has some closing power. So it's got the new Stannis, who of course with Lightbringer is very strong. It's got Robert's Renown. It has Sir Justin Massey. It has I think that's it actually for closing power. But those are some renowned bodies to give it a little bit of speed. It's just all around a well-rounded deck. And it's of course running Answers, Begging Brother, very powerful against shadows. Old Bill Bone, good against free folk. Red Priest, good against everybody. Spears of the Merlin King, good against Greyjoy and reset heavy situations. Of course, that means it's running Wildfire Assault as its reset because of the interaction between the two. And of course, Spears of the Merlin King and Dale have really good interactions. So, all things considered, it's extremely strong and consistent. It's got control. It's got with Mel, with the big Salice, with Red Priest, with Big Rob's 3 choices. So it's able to play the mid-range game with its big boys of Stannis and Robb, but it's also able to control your opponent and what they want to do. And of course with Big Bro. So, but what really makes this deck, I think, good in the meta isn't so much its draw deck. Its draw deck, has some card advantage in the form of like Blackwater Bay, but what really makes it really strong is the way in which it allow the basic middle of the road nature of its character base and its location base really means that it can leverage the plots. It's like this is actually built in many ways like old school War Succumb decks where you have sort of a nice, tasty, crunchy middle when it comes to your draw deck and a just powerful, redundant plot deck. So it's got a standard opener and sort of late summer feast. It has a reset response and a card draw engine in the form of Return to the Fields. It's got Varys' Riddle, which I think it's probably frequently opening to try to do that cute at the gates interaction. and then running Wildfire Assault as its reset, particularly because of its interaction with Spills of the Merlin King. And Wildfire Assault can get people. Very good. But it's also got a couple of answer plots that I really love. So Parlay at Storm's End is probably the most medium of them. Name a challenge type. So this could, until you reveal a new plot card. So this can, no type of challenges. So this can be used as an opener if you have a shitty setup. It can be used in the middle of the game, say power challenge, to shut off the opponent's ability to win. Because remember, unlike the neutral version of that, Calm Over Westeros, it just turns the challenge off. It doesn't reduce the claim. Very, very strong from there. You can also turn off intrigue challenges at key moments if you have a good hand. But I absolutely love the double Force March here. Absolutely love it. Particularly because you have Red Priest, R'hllor Infiltrator, Bill Bone, Dale Seaworth, Devin Seaworth, Alistair Florent, Emery Florent. These are all kind of chuddy-ass dudes who love to be Force Mark targets. It's super good against Greyjoy. It's super good against Stark. It's super good against Bara, Baratheon Rush decks. Well, not if they're necessarily getting that whole the attachment. Oh my god, why did I already forget attachment? Azora High Reborn. There we go. Azora High Reborn trigger code, but it's still pretty good. It's great against Free Folk. It's extreme, like a lot of Free Folk decks can't survive Force March into Force March. Has high initiative, so lets you go toe to toe with Greyjoy. Really just fantastic card, and I think it's really smart to be able to run two of them. And then of course Barring the Gates, which provides you, just says F you to Shadows decks. Like most Shadows decks, they know that probably one Barring will be played, and they have some kind of answer, some kind of game plan. They can put you in a situation where, okay, you get some 3 unopposed challenges, or I saved a few things on my board to oppose your challenges. But they only are expecting one turn. But to be able to go gain an advantage barring just blows out Shadows decks. And then, of course, King of the North, similar. To be able to go get an advantage barring King of the North, or even, it feels even more obnoxious to go get an advantage barring King of the North barring. Like, this deck is not fun for Shadows decks to play. And if if the GenCon meta had broke differently for Bretton, if it had been more of a Shadows and less of an aggro situation, I think that this deck would have taken him further, and still took him pretty far into the top 16 of probably the most competitive tournament in North America this year so far, outside of the War format. So this is more, if you are more of a mid-range player, you like to feel like you're Aristotle, mid-range and control player, you like to feel like you're Aristotle, that every single choice you make is the central thing. This deck is definitely the one to play. It has a lot of game against a variety of different decks, just like what the Wars of Carthagena did before its restriction. Bara is probably the only faction with the ability to run Wars to Come consistently, because it's opportunity cost of the other restricted cards. So it gives up trade routes, basically, to do this, and you can build Bara strategies at this point with a successful econ base, so you don't necessarily need trade routes. So Bara is probably basically the only faction that can build traditional Wars to Come decks that dominated the last competitive season, well, 2/3 of the last competitive season, sort of before the banhammer came down hard before Worlds. If you just want to smash people in the face and have a bunch of outs across the board, particularly to Greyjoy, this is the deck to do. I think that there's a lot less room for error with this deck because it's redundant. I don't like if Bretton's deck, and this isn't about it on a deck building level, it's just more on a strategy level. Mid-range decks and control decks are just less, because they want to spread their answers out. And this deck spreads its answers out. It's got Hunting Accident as an answer to problematic characters with renown. It has Begging Brother as an answer to character abilities, and to a lesser extent, so just good characters in general. It has an all-purpose answer in Red Priest. It has Selyse here. It has Scene Thought, Thought in the Flames here, Scene in Flames, to sort of provide you with some spot answers to general things. It's got Vanguard Lancer to slow down rush decks. It's got a spread of answers for a variety of couple of decks, but if the top 25 cards of your deck are unkind to you, you could draw your answers out of order. This is much more a reactive than a proactive deck. So it's always going to be less consistent. This is a proactive deck if there ever was one. It is going to do what it wants to do most of the time unless you disrupt it. The questions that it's asking its opponent is really hard to answer because of the consistency across the board. So probably the Greyjoy Prince deck, excuse me, the Greyjoy, not Greyjoy Prince, oh my god, it's because of the title, I'm looking at the title. The Baratheon trading with the Cohort deck is probably the strongest of the two, but definitely they're both very good options coming into US Nationals weekend, Euros weekend, Lord of the Crossing 2 weekends. For the sort of the final half. Because what's super interesting about the current meta is this is one of the most sustained, very similar metas that we've had with a lot of competitive events. This month began with GenCon. It's ending with US Nationals. This is a long stream. It's got US Continentals, European Continentals, a big necked event, and German Nationals, which was a big Nationals, and Canadian Nationals as well as this weekend as well. So there's like a bunch of competitive events in a very tight component, which is we don't frequently have this, except maybe traditionally in the fall around Worlds. There's also a similar situation. So we really know a lot about this meta, and I really think that Baratheon is a meta because we know a lot about this meta. Sort of a General Thrones meta call situation. So in order to successfully call a level, it's almost never a good idea to bring a level 2 strategy in Thrones, unless you truly hate playing the mirror of what the best deck is. So like, for example, Greyjoy. I hate playing Greyjoy mirrors. I would rather rip my eyes out. So I want to play a level 2 strategy if Greyjoy is the best deck. But because we don't have a lot of consistent data across metas, where it's really easy to say, okay, here are the best decks, so I should play this level 2 strategy. You should almost always play the level 1 strategy. However, because we have so much data about where we are right now, a level 2 strategy really can come in and take over a tournament. And Hanno's success in German Nationals really shows that. So that is my advice to you right now. If I was going to Euros, I would probably look really hard at this Bara list. Or something could answer this Bara list. Okay, so what answers these two strategies? So I think Bretton's deck is easier to answer. You just want to play a very strong proactive deck. So like Free Folk, which of course my man's Matt Clemens beat Bretton at GenCon, is a very, very good deck. Things with the crossing agenda, so that would be like Greyjoy Crossing, Stark Crossing, will punish Bretton's deck. Because if we can just sort of like require him to draw. Now, of course, the thing about Bretton's deck is it can beat anything if it draws its cards in the right order. What you want to do is you want to put him in a situation where he has to have drawn those cards. That's generally how you beat any control deck and any mid-range deck that leans on the control way, in which Bretton's deck does. Now, Hanno's deck's a little trickier. How would you beat this? So, would be playing something else with a lot of redundancy. So the Greyjoy that probably would beat this is Greyjoy Crossing, because you sort of have a spread. It's not just about leveraging the power of a single character, and you have a sort of a broader board. You also have so Prince decks and these kind of cohort-y style rush decks have a problem. That they are based on either in the form of Prince, they are based on a single character. The agenda, if you control that character, you put a milk on it, you put a hunting accident on it, you blanket every turn with a mirror that's coming back. Like, just the power of it gets reduced. You still get the stand, you still get the draw if you can win the challenge, but like it's not as powerful. Excuse me. Now, Cohort, this is very fast deck. Because it has a lot of power gaining capabilities with its Azor High Reborn. So, but if you can stop that bullshit, it doesn't have a way to gain power fast. It's the reason why Crossing, despite being one of the first agendas designed, despite that the level of agenda power creep has gone high, the fact that it still remains on curve or even above curve is because it's the only agenda to a lesser extent, Faith Militant is like this, but Faith Militant has a much harder condition to reach, and of course demands your deck be built in a very specific way. But the fact that it has the ability to just gain power through the agenda by winning that third challenge means that you have a win condition built into your agenda. And not a win condition in the sense of I get to search up my Bob, play my Bob, win some challenges with Bob. No, you just win a challenge and you get one power closer to your victory condition. That separates it in every way from every other agenda and makes it powerful. So I would probably, if I'm wanting to answer these Bara decks, so particularly Hanno's deck demands that you get into, instead of a mid-range race, you get into a rush race. So decks that don't want to interact with you or have ways of interacting with you while also furthering its power. So like a Greyjoy Crossing deck that's running its Vinces, that's running the Euron, that's running the new Euron, the 6-cost Euron. So it has those interaction tools, but it also has a win condition that is not just like outvaluing you in the form of like Asha, or outrushing you with this single character that if I control this single character with a milk, Balon is just a good body. Not even a good body. At this point, he's a mediocre body with a milk on him. He's a busted body with the Prince agenda and ability to stand him and do 2 challenges if his text is valid. If his text isn't valid, the card is it's just not very good. Anyway, but Greyjoy Crossing gets to run all these rush cards, but it has this additional win condition that doesn't require a specific character or a specific set of interactions. So that means it can interact with you while also being proactive. So it could definitely beat Hanno's deck. The same is probably true for Stark, maybe even Lannister Crossing. I mean, I don't even know if Lanny Crossing is still a thing, but theoretically Lannister Crossing with its treacheries can definitely hit some things. It can do some stuff. There's not a lot of huge stuff that you want to treachery here. But I mean, like a Overlord Infiltrator is pretty good to get treachery in, or a Shireen Trigger or things like that. But anyway. But just sort of like a faster deck. Another thing that's probably pretty good is combo. So there's Melisandre, there's Red Priest, but Hanno's deck isn't running Seed and Flames. It doesn't have a huge number of ways to challenge-based control what your opponent's doing, besides, intimidate. So a combo deck that doesn't really care, and I definitely think a combo deck could be Bretton too. Bara doesn't really, if it doesn't get a good Red Priest trigger, where it can steal like the key card that you need, it doesn't have a lot of ways to screw you over as the combo deck, because the level of like interaction that the combo decks demand of you, Stark is really good at being combo, because it has Rickon, it has Mira, it has a lot of different ways, like Bran. It has these sort of ways to interact with you. But neither of these Bara decks really have the kind of tools, besides Hunting Accident. But of course, the Tyrell Dragon has Karth, excuse me, to do this. So my advice is, if you're afraid that, okay, Roy did this awesome How in the Wife video about how great Bara is, Hanno, one of the best spectators in the world, won, a good kid from New England, did really well at GenCon, so did Wausau, those sort of northerners, they all are really good with Bara. Oh man, Bara's great. If you're afraid of that, if you're afraid of Bara being good, play Hardcore Rush. And that's about characters versus specific synergies, so like Greyjoy or Stark. And then I think Greyjoy is probably the best, to be honest with you. And play combo to beat these decks. I think that's sort of where Bara has a weakness, particularly the way in which you're building the mid-range control Bara, or you're playing this like rush aggro Bara. But anyway, I think that brings us to the end. I am going to be doing at least one other video before U.S. Nationals, where I think I'll talk pretty big detail about where I think the meta is, and if I was going to U.S. Nationals, what I would bring. And probably we'll talk a little bit about like where the lances are for U.S. Nationals. That will probably come out the Friday before or the Saturday of U.S. Nationals. I will also, if you're looking for that kind of content, be doing I get to do, for 3 years in a row, I get to do U.S. Nationals remote commentary. I'm really excited. I will have a bunch of guests, and we'll have a good time of watching hours and hours and hours of Thrones. Hopefully the meta is not as stagnant as it was last year, because last year had a similar thing where there was a bunch of tournaments in August, and how many times did we watch Dustin and Andros own people with Stark? A lot. So hopefully we'll have a little bit more of a diverse meta, and it's not just like Andros and Dustin owning people with Greyjoy this year. Hopefully we'll have a little bit more interestingness in what they're playing and what's at the top tables, but we'll see. That's the fun thing about doing commentary. So you can watch that from the White Book, and you can also find this on the White Book YouTube channel, or catch my content on the White Book or on Second Sons. But until next time, oh yes, leave comments down below for future topics. Again, I want to try to get into this, do about 1 or 2 videos a month. Hopefully my life will allow that to happen, but if not, I will do my best to get these videos out in a timely manner. Anyway, so like, comment, do all that YouTube stuff, and until then, have a good day, year, month, week.